In this episode of Investors and Operators, I'm speaking with Kim Gubera, who is the CEO of PIRTEK. PIRTEK replaces hydraulic and industrial hose services through specially equipped mobile service vans and retail storefronts. It is a franchise model with over 150 locations nationwide. And we met each other through a video shoot, actually, on one of our clients' Princeton Equity. And I thought that, Kim, you have an amazing story, and I'm super interested in this business and the growth and also just your story. So I actually want to dive in, not to the facts and figures of the business. I want to go to what we were talking about before we hit record, which is like your favorite books and what you're reading right now. I want to start with that. So what is the book that you were holding up? And let's dive into it.
Yeah. So I'm an avid reader, first of all. Always have been, even as a kid. So at any one time, I'm probably reading two to four books, bits and pieces here and there, maybe one for spiritual reasons, one for business reasons, one for fun. But I actually picked this book up over the weekend in Chattanooga at a used bookstore. So it's kind of old. Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. I've read the other one, but this one's the at work one. And so I'm just reading one little section a day, and they're still very relevant. Good reminders of things you should and shouldn't do at work. So,
that begs the question: do you sweat the small stuff? And what are examples?
Yeah, I naturally, I can be a worrier and a stressor, and I've really worked on that a lot over the last few years. But sometimes it still tries to creep up. So I have to work on making sure I remind myself that I'm not in control of everything.
It's interesting because, when in leading a business, one of the things that helps us lead a business is that we do sweat the small stuff, but then it's also kind of taking the bigger picture. Or what I've learned is, I remember as an analyst in investment banking, an associate in investment banking, and then you're on vacation and then you get that email and it's like, and I look back and I'm like, number one, we didn't even win the pitch. And like, was it really worth formatting and like these tiny things that would just keep me up at night? And really, the small stuff. And then now with our business, like, okay, if something's wrong on a LinkedIn post or in a video, like at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world. And it's not like this is $100 million decision. It's a video and we can adjust it. But what I learned actually in managing and leading is like, what's more important and the most important is how we treat that employee to help them be like, hey, it's okay. Like, we're all going to mess up, but here's how we can fix that. But I was not like that before with myself and then early leading. But I'm curious, like, what are some of the small stuff that you think you have sweat over? And then, is that how we answer this question?
Yeah, sweated, I guess. I don't know. I would, like you, if anything was wrong, on social media or a post or something like that, I would like be, knotted up about it. And then I started realizing that most people don't even notice, quite truthfully. And so that, I learned that a few years ago. I think when you're in franchising, there is a little bit of a tendency to have that worry exacerbated because you're depending on the actions, feelings, and business decisions of 160 franchise owners in our case, or 160 franchises, and they have life events and they have all those other things I talked about, emotions and business philosophies. And a lot of times I would take on their worry, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm having a problem. And then I'll be like, oh, I'm so knotted up about this one thing that's happening, 2,000 miles away that I have absolutely no control over. And so I think reminding myself constantly that I don't have control over everything, which maybe doesn't sound very CEO-ish, but you really don't have control over every single thing that's happening.
Yeah. And even on the big stuff, when I look back, when we were starting our first business in 2016 and there was no money in the bank and we had our first kid, I'm like, at that time, it felt like the end of the world. Like there were times when Jing and I were both depressed. Jing was breaking down. I was breaking down, no money in the bank. And then I look back at this and I would pay an infinite amount of money to rewind to 2016 when we were in the absolute depths and say, hey, guess what? This is part of the journey and you're going to get through it. You might not have any idea how you will get through that, but you can't buy back time. You can always try to find some money. You can always try to, and I was like, what is the actual downside scenario here? Oh my God, I got to go live with my mom and my wife and my kid. Is that real? Like, that's first world big problem.
It is a first world problem.
What are some things that you faced in like, what are some things that you thought were the big stuff, but 5-10 years later, you're like, wait a second, that wasn't that bad. Or I made a big deal out of it.
My gosh, there would be so much, because I think my personality type tends to think that I might tend to be pessimistic. And I think, again, I've worked very hard on changing some of that. You know, I think changing jobs, I was like, oh, what's happening? And then in this case, it turned out to be the best move I ever made. So I do think that as you get older, you are able to look back on things that have happened and said, wait a minute, that at the time seemed very dire. And now look how it turned out. It turned out even better for me than I even thought. So I think age is on your side on that, because you have more experiences to draw on. I will say that, you know, again, because it being a franchise organization, me panicking about something that might seem dire with a franchisee is not good for my employees, and it's not good for the franchisee. And so I think that also was an awareness that I came to in watching my predecessor. And when he'd be concerned, but he wouldn't overly react, right? And so the first year I was CEO, I really worked on that really hard to not overreact like that, because when I'm nervous, the whole organization becomes nervous. And so I think as a leader, you have to learn not to fake it. It actually made me force myself to learn how to deal with it and deal with it differently. And to your point, say, this is probably not the end of the world. It's a challenge, but how are we going to circumvent it? Which I'm a problem solver. So, you know, that would happen, but I'd freak out first. And so now I try not to freak out.
How did you discover that about yourself? Did, you know, somebody that you'd be like, Kim, you are kind of making us nervous. Like, was there a particular moment when someone like kind of brought it up to you, or how did you realize
it? Two things happened. One, I read it somewhere, and I can't tell you where. And it was the first year that I was CEO, but I also had a person that worked for me, and they were phenomenal at their discipline, but they freaked out anytime anything went sideways. And I watched it, and then I watched their team react to it.
So that made you be like, wait a second.
And I went, oh, I could see how that would not be good for me to do that now, right? And so I really did make a cognizant decision that I'm not going to react like that anymore. I'm not, and actually, again, I'm not faking it. With time, I realized, oh, I didn't freak out about that, and everything worked out okay. So I can relax, you know, a little bit. Just because you're CEO doesn't need to mean you need to be knotted up every single minute of the day, right? About something. I don't think we make good decisions under that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, just that situation when we're in a low point of our life and we don't see a way out. And I actually think about the nonprofit 51 Vets, which we started. It helps transitioning veterans get jobs. And I've seen a number of times on our Slack channel, somebody's, you know, sharing some bad news of like somebody took their life. Mm-hmm. And that's happened multiple times in, you know, the years that I've been doing that. And it wasn't, they might've lost a job or whatever, but the compounding effect of the long-term effects of being exposed to what they have, transitioning to a completely different part of their new chapter in their life and not knowing how to navigate that, but the expectation is that they're going to be at the highest level of performance. And it's just like, hey, I wish I could share like almost my stories. Like it got bad
Hmm.
and I had dark thoughts. And I'm thinking, I wish I could go back to that version maybe in 2016, 2017, be like, hey, it's going to get better. And here's the data points that shows you it will get better and how to push through that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't have someone to talk to.
Hmm.
Um, and something I've done in the last year is get an executive coach. And gee, I wish I'd done that 5 years ago. That has been life changing, really. And I highly recommended it because, in the CEO seat in particular, it can be lonely. People say it's lonely at the top. I'm not saying I'm at the top, but it does get lonely because you you need, and I'm also in a peer group with some other female CEOs
Yeah.
in franchising. That those two things in itself, just having that support system, and I don't think everybody has that, because sometimes you do need somebody to say it's going to be okay tomorrow. What you're doing matters, and what you're doing is good. Um, you do need, I mean, I don't need to hear that every day, but every once in a while, sure. I think everybody needs to hear that.
That's so important. And it makes me think on the importance of like a peer group and executive coaching, and actually not as a replacement, but almost as like to help out with like mental health. Like I have a doctor that I go to every year. I have a coach that helps me out with my triathlon training. I don't have a psychologist. I don't have a psychiatrist, but like those are really important discussions that I don't know. I probably should discuss. But also like the peer group. So we have a monthly meeting with some of the CEOs and 51 vets where we talk about this kind of stuff, but also so they can speak. It's almost, I think on mental health, I feel better when I have someone who speaks business, and then it helps to uncover other stuff about personality. Like, why am I anxious?
Yeah.
And
I could totally see that, because I think you do start to, I mean, let's face it, the business bleeds over into your personal. I- If you care about what you're doing, it bleeds over into the personal.
for us, it is personal because there's no separation. Like we do what we do because we love it. Like this is a sport to me. I love what we do. It's not separated. It's integrated.
Yeah.
And especially now with, I mean, not now, Jay and I have been married for 10 years and we've had the business together for 6 years. But like, then there's also that dynamic of working with, your spouse who's also your business partner.
Hmm.
Um, so what's maybe, the difference between you as a CFO versus you now as CEO? And I think when did you take over? Is it 2019?
2019.
Yeah. What's the difference between? Actually, maybe a better question is, what's the difference between you as a CEO in 2019 versus you now in 2024? What are some of
Mm.
these different ways that you've evolved?
Number one, I would say I relaxed, not in my efforts or anything like that, but just internally. And I think some of that obviously will come with anybody, confidence, because I mean, that first year, I knew I could do it, but yet deep down inside, you're like, can I do it? Right. And so once you do that, and then 2019 was a good year. It was hard, obviously, because you go from being very tunnel focused on one area of the business, in my case, the financial arena, to now being responsible for all areas of the business, some of which I had very little understanding of, like our product, and things like that. And then you go through
And how to
2020.
sell?
Yeah. And then you go through 2020, as my second year as CEO, which was interesting. Um, but that builds confidence, right? Because, so I feel like I'm more confident today. I feel like I can speak more confidently and with more knowledge about the business, because I've become more ingrained in every area of it. So I think that gives you confidence, and it gives the people around you confidence. But I'd say the other thing too is I really realized the importance of having very strong players around me. And that's taken an evolution over time. And then getting those people that are, responsible for certain parts of the business and then getting out of their way.
How did you
I think I was more
strengthen?
controlling, right, than I
Was
am now.
why? Out of ego?
Yeah, I think, you know, my probably, they say that accountants are natural controllers, you
Yeah.
know, because that's just your personality typically, and that's how I was trained in accounting. I'm CPA. I still have my CPA license, but I wanted to know as much as I did about the financial area of the business when I was a CFO. I wanted to do that about every area of the business and can't do that. Instead, you've got to have shared philosophies with key personnel in your organization that you have this high level of trust in, that you can say, go and do. And even if they make a decision that's different than what you would have done, you can support them in that because you have the shared business philosophy. And so that has definitely morphed over time to where I feel like I'm more effective today because of that. And I'm definitely more confident, just because of the time that has passed and the hurdles we've overcome and the growth that we've had, quite truthfully.
Is there a particular example of, maybe it was for franchise development or a marketing decision or a service expansion decision, where something happened where you're like, all right, I'm gonna hold back and let the team do it, and then that happened, you're like, wait, oh, that's what it's like to have amazing people around me.
Yeah.
Is there a particular example you can think of?
I think, and I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but I actually think that a lot of that has happened since the transaction has happened.
When
So
you partner with Princeton
yeah,
Equity?
yeah, which was just, 9 months ago or whatever. And, it's not because we were doing anything wrong previously. It's that just we're in a different mode of operation now. And, the I've seen this happen in Fran Dev and marketing in particular, where I get a person in there that comes in with a lot of vast knowledge about their particular area of the business
Yeah.
in terms of franchising and in terms of working with other PE firms. And it just escalated, right? That area that maybe we were just kind of trying to make it work. And when you get it's kind of like in a relationship. When you get with the right person, it's not as much work.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really happened even in the last few months. It's one of the things that I actually appreciate about partnering with private equity is that it kind of opens up your world to the things you didn't know you didn't know. Because when you're privately held, you just kind of stay on your island, right? And that's not a dig on the people that were owned us before because they're fantastic. They were the founders of PIRTEK and they knew everything about the business. But now we have a larger pool of resources with the other portcos, with our operating partners. And I mean, one of the questions I ask of them a lot is, well, what have you done before? What's happened in other brands? What are some examples of if we did this, what could happen? And when you're privately owned, you just don't have those resources.
Access to people on a similar industry, similar business, but a different industry. So
Yeah,
whether it's
the same business
Redstone
model though,
or
because it's
Five
franchising.
Star,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
what are some of the other things? What other pieces of it, or what advice would you have for sellers on what to expect, kind of before and after working with private equity, generally speaking?
So prior to the transaction, ours was not the normal story because we didn't have an investment banker and we weren't our investment bank and we weren't looking in particular to sell. And
How did you meet Princeton?
They pursued us for a while,
Okay.
for years. They actually just brought this out recently at the investors meeting. They're like, we pursued PIRTEK forever. But I think it was just the right time and the right place for the owners, the previous owners. But I will say we had a very fast due diligence also, just barely over 90 days.
Yeah.
um, and what I would say to people is one thing that the prior owners taught me is always run the business as if it's for sale. And therefore, our due diligence was pretty smooth because we had great records, we had strong financials, we were able to pick a small team of people that could handle the knowledge of what was going on, and practically work them to death because they were still doing their day jobs. But um, you got to be prepared for that. It is a lot of work. And if you have bad record keeping, I always tell emerging franchisors, make sure your records are good from the beginning, especially if you think this is going to be your exit. Um, and then I think for afterwards to be prepared for change. And
What are the different functional areas that changed? How did it change?
honestly, I had a lot of attrition, and it wasn't necessarily me driving that, maybe in a couple instances, but some people just did not, they weren't comfortable in that environment. I think the environment also elevated, and not everybody could make that
Yeah.
switch. So I had quite a bit of attrition that I wasn't necessarily prepared for. I just
And
didn't think
is
that would
that a
happen.
function of like, hey, just the pace of growth, not just top line, but every function of the business, the pace is going to accelerate. And that's
Yeah.
also because of the timeline of private equity is 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
So their job to their investors is to grow that business in a sustainable way within that time frame.
Yes.
And it makes even us think of, the past 6 years with this business, like the people who got us here hopefully will be the people who get us there.
Yeah.
And equally important, us as co-CEOs, hopefully we are the people to get us there. And that, it's freaking scary when we think about like, well, one day, do we want to sell at some point in the future? And I'm like, and then there's that ego of like, no, it's our business. Like we started it, we want to run it. And it's actually an accountability question. Like, do we want to be the CEOs who have to grow to that next stage of the business?
Yeah.
We are not now capable of running a 50-person team. We're 10. So what do we need to develop as co-CEOs, leaders, founders to grow into that? So if that point comes, then we're actually ready to take it to the next stage.
I do think you have to be self-aware of that. And your people do as well, or you have to do that for them. So obviously you want to, I'm a big fan of investing in people, and because I've had some great mentors and I try to do that for other people. So you obviously want to give people the education and the ability to elevate if they want to. I think it's coming to the realization not everybody wants to for different reasons. And these departures weren't all negative or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. It's just now in hindsight, I'm learning from a lot of other people that have been down this road before, this is normal. And so I think anybody should be prepared that there will probably be attrition afterwards. And when you're part of a franchise organization, honestly, that also makes your franchisees nervous. So you have to be prepared to address that. I did. I had like a town hall with people because they're like, "What's happening? The sky's falling." Okay, no, this is an inflection point for the business to go to the next level, and it's kind of like we're going from here to here real quick, and not everybody's going to make that transition.
How did you prepare for that? How many days after the actual transaction was announced? Like, when did you do the town hall? What was the structure of the town hall? Was it just you and the management? Was Princeton there? Because I've seen from other clients that we serve, other private equity clients, they'll have like the sponsors come in there to say, hey, by the way, here's what private equity is. Like, here's what we actually do. What was your town hall like post transaction with Princeton?
So there was two. The one that I'm referring to about the attrition thing happened. I actually did 90 days after the transaction to kind of address some of the changes people had seen externally and what was going on and how the relationship was going. But we actually told people the day of the transaction. We had town halls with all of our, not really a town hall, it was more like a video presentation to all
Yeah.
of our owners, letting them know. It was just myself and it was the former owner. He spoke and then I spoke, just letting people know what had happened. Princeton typically does not get involved at that level with franchise owners. That's what myself and my management team does. And then it was just, after the 90-day mark, I thought, well, this is important time to talk to everybody again. So then I just did it in small groups that time and
Yeah.
asked people to submit questions ahead of time, right? And then I
And these
answered
small groups
those.
of the different, like, regional franchise or
Yeah,
franchisees.
we just did it basically kind of regionally or whatever, and just
Yep.
split people up into small groups of, I think, 10 or 15, and then asked them to submit questions, asked everybody to submit questions, which I then answered all the questions on each one of those calls. And one of them was about the attrition that we had had, right? So I
At
think
the franchisor
at the
level of,
franchisor
like,
level,
Jane Smith is no longer helping
yeah.
manage this relationship, like, whatever that is.
Yeah, because, franchise owners, one good thing about having different personalities on your franchisor team is that the some franchisee may not connect with me, but they may
Yeah.
connect with my VP, right? And so if the person that they've connected with all these years or their number one is gone, that's that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
So when you asked me the question, what would you tell people to prepare for? Prepare for change and prepare for one of those to be attrition. And I think you have to hit it head on, which is what I did, right? Just said, this is what's happened.
So what are the things that you did right, and what are the things that you would do differently in messaging to the franchisees post transaction?
Mm. In a perfect world, I would have gone and seen, like, done regional type meetings and sat down with small groups of people, but that just wasn't reality in time. But if I would say, if you have somebody that's listening to this and they're thinking of going this route and they can do that, 100% I would do that. Face to face with
What was
people.
the constraint though from doing a 2 week roadshow? Was it just
Time. I mean, it was very, with us, because we were a family owned business, we lost some of our family that had worked in the business. So, I mean, we were
yeah,
working around the clock. It just
yeah,
wasn't doable. But honestly, Jordan, I also didn't think of it at that time, right?
yeah.
I figured, well, people will reach out if they have questions, which some did, but
Could
I
that have
think
been done by somebody else on the team who had tenure with the business and who had the relationships? Or was there
it
just
was
not that?
all, I mean, everybody was all, we're a family owned business. We were a family owned business. So we were
Yeah,
already kind of skinny.
yeah,
And now we're even reporting more and the data and stuff that's required for private equity. There
yeah.
would have been no time whatsoever.
Got it.
So
Well,
I think
on that,
in a perfect world, you build in for that.
on the reporting side, was that part of the initial town hall? Like, hey, here's one of the things that is going to be different: increased reporting. Here's what this actually means. By the way, it was going to make your life easier. You're going to run more profitable businesses. Like, how did you message that? When did you message that? If that was
Yeah,
one of the things you talk about.
we did talk about that some, but it was more, I mean, first of all, you can say that this new data tool that we're doing is going to help your individual business, but sometimes that takes months to get that actually to come to fruition. So, especially when you've got an organization as large as ours
Yeah.
that you've transitioned, we don't just have, 30 franchises.
What was it when
Um,
you transacted? How many franchisees?
we would have been at 140 ish.
Yeah.
Yeah, 141, something like that.
Okay.
So, that's a lot. And to say that you're going to have this new tool next week. I mean, we're still we still haven't been able to completely get everything rolled out that we want to because there's just a lot to do.
Yeah.
And I'm a very impatient person, so that's hard for me. But it's just you're moving a large ship, you don't move it like that.
Yeah.
It has to go incrementally, and you got to take everybody with you.
What has what are some of the other things that you did well and things that you would do differently in the kind of post-transaction phase, and how to message to franchisees and the team?
Yeah, just in terms of typically messaging or other things that might have we have done.
Everything. Um,
Because I think our messaging was okay. I did go and meet with one small group of my more senior or larger owners. Again, I would have loved to have done that with everybody. It would have been ideal. But what we did well, uh, number one, I have a great CFO, so
yeah.
that really makes a difference. And she and I together, because I also have the background that helps. So we were able to get a lot of the data moving very quickly with Princeton. I kept saying to her, like, I feel for these organizations that are smaller and maybe have switched over to private equity and they have no clue about some. I mean, she and I are both CPAs. They'd have no clue about some of these things they're asking for. I just feel like we had a head start on a lot of that. Um,
Yeah.
Not that they don't help you through it, but it just made it go faster. But I will tell you, I think the thing that we did the best is that we embraced our relationship with our private equity partner. We weren't resistant to it. We didn't feel, they also are very respectful. It didn't feel like they were encroaching. And maybe that's because I'm not the founder. I think if you were
Yeah.
a founder, that might be a little bit harder. But we really embraced it as an opportunity, for all of us and for the brand to be better. And I think we're better for it today because I feel like our relationship with Princeton is very strong. Um, if we have had any points that I needed extra help from them, I got it. But they're not nudging into our business every single day. But they're watching, obviously, what's going on as they would. But I think I could see how other people may not embrace that. And that could be a rub, I think. And I think we did that really, really well. Not only myself, but the other people that were here that knew what were going on and that were involved with them at such a high level.
What are the different functional areas that have really improved in the past year because of working with them? For example, data, or like, can you maybe kind of put some meat on the bone in terms of like what's actually changed in the business since last year?
Yeah. I'd say number one, franchise development, which is, of course, the selling of the franchise units. Um, we have some different people, but it's not just that. We also have an operating partner that Princeton provides to us who's not necessarily a employee of Princeton, but works in conjunction with them. And he's highly focused and has worked at a high level at a very large franchise organization. He has so much knowledge and ideas that we never had exposure to before. And that has really changed the way we run franchise development today and opened up a lot of opportunities. So I'd say there for sure. And the other is in marketing, where we just didn't put a lot of emphasis maybe on marketing
In what way?
organization. We
Like,
knew it was a
did you have a head
function.
of marketing and
We didn't have a CMO, and now I have a CMO, right? And that has made a big difference, you know? And I just think just the resources that we're putting towards it as well have increased, and we're seeing a different result from that. And
like
obviously
what
the
type of
data
things are
as
you?
well, but
Yeah,
go
what are you
ahead.
doing on the marketing that's different than you were before? Everything from all different kind of. Yeah, I mean, just kind of generally speaking. Actually, not generally, specifically. What are you doing on marketing that's different before and after?
Well, there's a lot of that I can't talk about yet because it hasn't been rolled out.
Okay.
So, but I will say the primary thing was just investing in more resources for marketing. Like we increased the size of our team. We did bring in that CMO who's a seasoned CMO person from another brand. Um, and a lot of the other things are to come. I can't tell you yet,
But
but
it sounds like the biggest difference is that you're viewing it as a key lever in the business because you
yeah,
hired a senior person who's now responsible
right.
for that.
I think that's the best way to say it, is that absolutely we weren't seeing that as a key driver of what we would call our retail sales or the sales of the franchise owners. And that philosophy has 100% changed.
Yeah.
And I think, especially here in the next month,
Yeah.
if any of my franchisees are watching this, there's going to be something rolled out for them as a tool that's going to be really helpful in driving those sales for them.
Over to data. What has life been like before and after working with Princeton on the data side? Like what are some interesting data points that you kind of discovered as a team? Like, oh wow, this is awesome. Like I'm glad we have this now.
Yeah. We're still working on how to get it out of our system, but they are data wizards. There's no doubt about it. They did a lot with data, and something that we did, kind of going back to advice for people that might go through this process. When we were going through the due diligence, we kept telling ourselves, if the sale doesn't go through for some reason, because that happens, we're going to learn as much as we can through this process to make the business that much better. And so we would literally take notes and say, make sure that we start looking at X in the future. And so I think what really just fundamentally changed is that being owned by the founders of the company, they know this business inside and out intuitively. So smart, just know everything about it. And Princeton got up to almost to their speed just by looking at data, right? And that, so you take somebody that has run the business for 40 plus years and learned everything the hard way, or, and they've got that knowledge and they know, hey, this is happening in the field. That must be a result of this, this changing with this customer vertical or whatever. And Princeton could find that out through the data. So we really didn't run the business at a high level with tons of data. I'm not
And
saying we didn't use
yeah,
data, we did. But now we look at it, we're looking at every month, we're looking at the growth of a new unit. Every month we're looking at how many jobs did they do. Whereas before that would happen maybe at certain periods of time within the business, but not necessarily
so
on
it
a monthly
wasn't
basis.
was it not as much of like an institutional imperative of this is how we manage data.
Correct.
And by the
Correct.
way, it's going to make everyone's life easier and better.
Yeah.
It's going to be painful in the beginning as we're trying to figure out what data do we want to get and then how do we get it in a sustainable, consistent way.
Yeah, I would say that is it. It wasn't, again, it wasn't that the business wasn't being run well or anything like
Yeah.
that. It's just that, a lot of it was more intuitive. They've seen it come and go over the years. So when you have somebody buy it that doesn't know all that,
Yeah.
they're going to use the data to make decisions, right? And then that's the way that happens going forward as well.
I love that. And we just went through a recent thing with our team on diving into our finances. We're like, I realized actually how little we do know about, profit on a client and managing the business, because when you're starting a business, what do you care about? Sales. Just keep the lights on.
Yep.
More cash coming in, then more cash is going out.
Yep.
But now we're at that next stage when we actually start being, better financial managers, which, by the way, if we want to run not 10 people, but a 50-person team, then Jing and I have to evolve as managers of the business.
Right.
But maybe shifting gears completely, how have you balanced family and your career? What are some of the challenges that you faced evolving and trying to balance those two?
Well, I'm an empty nester now and have been the whole time I've been in the C-suite. So I think I always say to myself, I do not know how people do it that have kids, but a lot of them do. Some of them are in my peer group and they still have children at home. So um, I went back to school. I got married and then I decided to go back to school and with a 1-year old and finish my degree, right? Um, and I was working full time, and it took me 9 years to finish my undergrad and my MBA. Um, I do not recommend doing that way, by the way. It's a horrible way to do it. But I was determined and I was tenacious. But during that time, during that 9-year period, I actually became a single parent as well. And, that was hard, right? I always have a lot of empathy for the people on our team that are single parent, men or women. But it did, I am a little bit, I can tend to be a workaholic, but I learned how to make it work, because obviously I was going to school and being a parent and working full time. Um, Now it's a lot easier, but yet it could still be hard because, of course, the more you go up the ladder, the more the demands increase. And so I've really, in the last year, made myself be more cognizant of taking downtime and making sure that I'm getting the proper rest, and which is really hard for me to admit, and taking time off, right? Because I think that makes you a better leader. It makes you a better person. I don't have all the answers about how to make it balance, and I think there's so much of that now that goes on. That's just a struggle for anybody to try to be a good parent at the same time. I'm glad I'm not in this role with small children. I think that I would struggle with that, I think. So anybody that does that, kudos to you guys.
The way that we solve it is just to put our kids in the business, employ them.
That's right.
four
I think
four
you
and
had your
7-year-old.
your daughter was with you, right? You just bring
Well,
them along.
yeah, we for your shoot with in Florida, like we were at Disney that week,
I
and
remember that now.
we did the Disney Dopey Challenge, which is 4 days in a row, 5K, 10K, half marathon, full marathon, on top of bringing the 4 and 7-year-old to the parks every single day. And then, oh, by the way, we got a video shoot. but I think that's an example of how I think we're doing things a lot better now with this business than we did with the previous business, because with the previous business, Debt Maven, my wife, Jing, was a lawyer at the time, and she was paying the bills while I'm off in startup land trying to get a tech startup off the ground. And we made so many mistakes in that business. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made was not having a regular sit down with my life partner, my business partner, my family partner of like, hey, here's where the business is at, good and bad. Because she was just in a black hole, had no idea what was going on.
Right.
Well, actually, she did know what was going on. She looked at that bank account and it was just going the wrong way. So I think that's one of the mistakes that we made in the past. But now, like with this business, 6 years into it, like it's completely different. But now we're actually integrating the business, the family, training, travel, everything is integrated. Yeah. The nonprofit, everything is integrated. And that time when we had your video shoot, like I crossed the finish line of the marathon on day 4, I was crying, not because, I was in pain, number 1, but number 2, of just like, this is the life that we wanted to live, of integrating everything.
I think that is a change that's happened too in society. Like when I was raising my child, in my case, I worked 7:30 to 4, right? And then work stopped and then family started. And I think now, because of remote work and being able to be on 24/7, which can be good and bad, but you can work, go home. And I know some of the people on my team do this, go home, do dinner, kids and things like that. And then sometimes they are working again. So I think there's some flexibility there that more than what we had maybe in the 90s when I was doing it.
Yeah. And it's good and bad of like,
it's good and bad.
The downside is you're potentially always on, but the upside is Jing and I just went to Europe for 3 weeks and we could manage the business. We're going to Asia for like next week for 2 weeks in China and Japan. And guess what? We're still able to do business,
Yeah,
pay bills. So I
correct.
think it's a matter of like how to figure out the the left and right boundaries,
Yep.
communicate that to the team. How have you thought about managing, oh, no, I don't want to say hardworking culture, but like the thing that I always think about is like I ask myself, what time does LeBron James start thinking about basketball? Is it 9 a.m. in the morning? What time does he stop thinking about basketball? Is it 5 p.m.? And like, how do we balance building a culture of professional athletes so we can be the best version of ourselves, the most skilled, the most competent, where we're traveling to video shoots all over the world? We're in London, going to San Francisco, come to see you in Florida. Like, how do you think about balancing creating a high performing team with people who just might have other functions or other interests in life? How do you get those two mentalities in the same business?
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? I think that there's been a major shift in business since COVID. And honestly, at first, I didn't really embrace it that much because I was a workaholic here from 7:30 in the morning till 7:30 at night kind of person. And we wanted everybody else to be that way too, right? And you can't be that way anymore. And I don't think it's healthy either, necessarily. I mean, sure, there's times you're going to do that. So I almost think, and this is going to sound really altruistic, I guess, but I think it's in how you exemplify that to your team. And also, I guess I'm probably known for having really high expectations of my team members, um, because I do want excellence in our organization. So I require that. So that's going to require a certain level of um, work ethic, you know, at the same time, at the same time, I'm understanding and supportive of your kid has a soccer game, you're not feeling well. I just had COVID a couple weeks ago when I came back from Europe, and I said, okay. One day I was sitting here, and it took me a while to recover. I was sitting here, I'm like, I don't feel good. I'm going home now, and I'm going to bed. And tomorrow, I will do what the rest of what I need to do. Because back to what we were saying, you can do that now, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be between that 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And I try to mirror that for them. And I also have to encourage them. Like I have some people I have to push out of here. And then I have some people that I have to say, listen, I need you to give a little bit more at the level that you're at.
Well, and I think
I
that
don't have a one size fits all answer for that.
it's tough, right? Because there are different, when you get to a certain size of a business, there are truly functions that really only need that. And that's a really good fit for that function as well as their life. And it's cool. It's 9 to 5,
Yeah.
come in, come out. You're not on that trajectory. You don't want that. And also we don't need that different. There's alignment. But I think one of the things that I'm discovering is also just that need for flexibility. So for example, like we're in the office twice a week, Mondays and Wednesdays. And then, hey, by the way, if you want to go to the beach on Thursday and work from there and then stay there for the next week, fantastic. Help yourself. As long as you're still crushing it with work, doesn't matter.
Right.
But I think one of the things that Jing and I have had to discover is that in the past, until the past maybe 6 months, 12 months, the first 4 to 5 years, we were not good at selling the vision, the mission, the values, and also what this means to you. Like, I have to sell the team on here's what we are doing, here's why you should stay, and here's where you're going. Not just expecting that they're like, oh my God, I see the future 5 years from now. Then I get to travel everywhere and I get to do these cool vids. Like we had to be specific about here's what we are selling you. You get to work across all these different marketing skills. You get to work across all these different types of clients, all these different geographies. That ain't going to happen in a 22, 23, 24-year-old if you go to a 500-person agency. And it's like, sorry, do this press release for this guy.
Yeah. I think for us, it's a little bit easier to sell the vision. Although I do agree with you, it has to be constant. You have to constantly remind people what our goal is and what what we're trying to do here. But when you're in franchising, you've got that overarching, we got to help all these people that signed up with us to have a franchise of whatever brand it is. We got to help them be successful and achieve their dreams. And that's one of the beauties of it. It also can be one of the painful pieces of it too, if
Yep.
that person doesn't make it or something happens, right? But I do think as long as we remind people consistently that that's what we're here to do, is to support franchise owners, I think it gives people a higher sense of purpose. Not to say that your vision doesn't matter, but you know what I mean? And I know that it does, but ours is very all encompassing. I think it almost makes it easier for us in franchising to remind people we're here to help the franchisees.
I love it. And I think that's a great place to wrap up with the importance of consistently selling the vision, the mission, the values to everyone on the team and everyone who's involved.
Yep.
Kim, this is awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thanks, Jordan. I really appreciate the opportunity.